One of the most anticipated indie games of at least the last 5 years came out recently. The gold standard for Metroidvanias, and a game that everyone is talking about potentially winning Game of the Year. So naturally, I played Nine Souls instead. I'm going to talk about this game in two sections, non-spoilers and then spoilers. I'll only show gameplay footage from the first section of the game and the first boss, but if you want absolutely no spoilers, then just turn the video off, come back after you play it. And I implore you to do so if you've never played this game before, because it is truly a masterpiece. I was completely blown away by this game in almost every way. Red Candle Games is a very small studio, around like 12 people, based in Taiwan, that has exclusively released story-driven horror games before Nine Souls, so it's pretty incredible what they were able to create with seemingly no experience in the genre at all. The horror game development does peek through in some points during the game. I was not expecting some of the brutality that you see in such a beautiful looking game. The game opens with like a cult-like celebration where a village is absolutely giddy at the fact that they're about to sacrifice some of their own people to their gods, which sets the tone for the clear undercurrent of unsettling themes throughout the rest of the game. A short time later, you find a flower that the villagers feel has symbolic importance during the sacrifice, left with a pile of discarded meat, showing that their feeling of significance in the ritual is severely misplaced. So this game does get a little morbid. This game feels like it was tailor-made for me. It uses a hand-drawn 2D art style, which I am a sucker for. I love 2D hand-drawn animation. Going with this art style ensures that the game will look just as good 50 years from now as it does today. And there's something just so pure about hand-drawn animation. With 3D, a lot of the times models will be painted and textured with a software like Substance Painter, where you definitely have control of how the model will look, but there is a layer of computer generation to it. Not that it looks bad, it looks incredible, but I love the idea that the developers had a vision for what they wanted the game to look like, and they just painted that. It's an art form that requires an insane amount of love and skill to paint literally everything you see in the game, and it's greatly appreciated, especially in today's age where we're inundated with AI slop at every turn. There's also a greater emphasis on the combat rather than the platforming, which I also vastly prefer. I didn't grow up playing platformers like Mario or the 2D Sonic games, so I honestly suck at platforming, and this game has a minimal amount. There's definitely some, but the combat is clearly the star of the show, and what the most amount of effort was put into, aside from the art. It has a Sekiro-style deflect system that is all about timing and rhythms, which in my opinion might be the most satisfying combat I've ever played. It gets you into this flow state where you're reacting to things on instinct and going with the flow of the fight without even thinking about it. It creates these incredibly dynamic moments where you're halfway through the fight and you haven't taken any damage, even though when you first founded the enemy, you thought there was no way you could possibly beat them. It's a game that has mastered learning a fight over hours until you've nearly mastered it, which is a monumental achievement for a developer that's never made an action combat before. There's also a talisman system on top of the deflecting that adds a surprising amount of depth to the combat. It seems simple at first glance, but they built the entire game around it with the internal damage and the different attachments that can change how talismans work. It all just culminates in one of the best combat systems I've ever had the enjoyment of playing. I also appreciate that there's a little bit of forgiveness with the parries. If you mistime it slightly and don't get the perfect parry, you take some internal damage that will slowly dissipate and become real health again if you don't mistime another parry or don't get hit. But if you do get hit before it returns, you lose all of that potential regained health plus the damage taken from that attack. It creates these crazy tense moments where your whole health bar is internal damage and you're one hit away from dying, but you can clutch it up and parry everything perfectly and get back into the fight with a completely full health bar. I love the system so much, and it adds to this intensity of every boss fight. It seems so simple, but combined with the talismans and jades, it creates this complex and diverse moment-to-moment game loop that is addicting. But the combat wouldn't be so damn good if there weren't good enemies and bosses to fight. I can happily say that that is not the case. The bosses in this game are almost all incredible. I will get into the specifics later in the spoiler section, but holy shit, almost every boss in this game is phenomenal. There are a couple that aren't my favorite, but aside from that, I have virtually no complaints. The story and lore are also pretty fleshed out and enjoyable. I think they did a really solid job with the characters and their relationships to where it's absolutely a plus for the game, rather than just something that you get through and endure. The story, while a little predictable, will absolutely throw you some curveballs that you didn't see coming, and there's heart to it. It seems like the developers wanted to make a compelling story with how much it features in the game, and I think they accomplished that. So if you're a fan of good combat, or even a good story in a game, I highly recommend you play this game, if you haven't. I'd heard nothing but praise for this game, and was still floored by how amazing it was. I think it's a masterpiece, and I really hope Red Candle Games returns to this style of game at some point, because they did such a fantastic job. It's honestly a travesty that this game wasn't even nominated for Best Indie Game last year. In my eyes, it absolutely deserved it. Do yourself a favor and go play it. Alright, spoiler time. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for my inevitable mispronunciation of some of these words, but the 9 souls all need to be talked about. I think the only two that I didn't particularly care for were Yanlao and Gao Meng. Gao Meng was a little too hectic too early on. If the fight had been just slightly later, when Yi has more abilities, I think the fight wouldn't have been as bad, but multi-enemy fights are usually just not fun for me, because they will have attacks that overlap, and there's not much you can do to avoid taking the damage. It also was quite frustrating that when Gao Meng would come down to revive her henchman, if you killed the other right before she rang the bell the last time, it would also revive. That made it quite difficult to time it out, so you only needed to deal with one enemy at a time. It's not a terrible fight, but probably my least favorite main boss fight in the game. Although after the fight, her end is incredibly gruesome. It was something I really didn't expect from the game. It was really the first time that I was like, damn, that's kind of messed up. But that certainly would not be the last time. Yanlao was the other boss I didn't care for, but for different reasons. It honestly was kind of a pushover, which is surprising for a game with such a high degree of difficulty. I think I beat it second try, which was not remotely the case for any other fight. Kang Gui, which you had to kill to escape the prison and didn't have a soul, was honestly my least favorite fight of the whole game. The whole thing is a gank fight and was super frustrating. I did not feel like I mastered the fight at all. I just happened to beat it once, and I felt like if I needed to fight it again, I would struggle just as much. The rest of the fights might take some time to get back into the timing, but I felt like I got those fights down. Ying Zhao was also fairly easy, but it was also the first boss, so it mostly worked as a tutorial. I understand it being easy. The rest of the bosses though, every single one of them was excellent and a real challenge. I think that the only problem I had with the rest of the bosses was this very niche thing that happened against Fuxi and Igong. They had attacks that were quite wide and sweeping, and there would be times where you were in between the attack and the boss, and it seemed pretty unclear which direction you were supposed to face to parry the attack. I would feel like I was overlapping with them, and face the attack instead of them, and then end up taking damage, which drove me slightly insane. Something I have to praise though, is that the developers let you parry in any direction while in the air. I think that was such a great decision, because as the game progresses, the fights start making you pay attention to the direction of attacks more and more. And being able to circumvent that in a way by just jumping and staying airborne as you parry off each attack, it just makes the combat flow so well. The Lady Ethereal and Igong fight showed this off really well. One other gripe was I wish that the game would queue up actions that can't be performed yet. I would finish attacking and go to heal and just stand there because I didn't wait just a second longer, and realized too late that the heal didn't go off. It was a small thing that honestly wasn't usually a problem, but became much more apparent during the fight with Igong, because the windows between her attacks were so short. But other than that, no notes. These 6 fights at first all felt unbeatable, but by halfway through the game, I ended up just trusting the developers and let myself learn the fight, and sure enough, by the end, I'm going in and taking no damage at all for the first half of the fight, and it felt like I've gotten as close as I'm ever going to get to mastering them. I can't praise these bosses enough. Like I pointed out with the parrying in air example, and another example would be the progressive push to use unbounded counters. The bosses just do a fantastic job of forcing you to engage with a mechanic and then get better at it as the next fight does something similar but a little harder. They all felt appropriately scaled for the point in the game where you meet them, and they were appropriately prepared to kick your ass for at least 45 minutes until you learn their attacks. Lady Ethereal was especially difficult when you first find her. It felt like a substantial uptick in difficulty compared to the early fights. When I first got to her third phase, I was absolutely devastated and felt entirely unable to beat her. But the game just does such a fantastic job of ramping up the difficulty through each phase. So by the time I got to the third phase and actually ended up beating it, it only took like 15 to 20 minutes because the rest of the fight prepares you for it. The attacks from all of these bosses do change once you get to a new phase, but they more build on top of their existing moveset and complicate it slightly rather than throwing entirely new moves at you for the most part. Lady Ethereal's fight is probably also as gruesome as the game gets. It was quite a surprise, even after the Gomang ending, to see her literally murder people with her bare hands, and then everything to get swept under the rug to further Igong's ambitions. It was brutal, and seeing Lady Ethereal struggle with her realization that she was the one that killed them and felt the need to be punished for it was probably as dark as this game got. You could definitely tell the dreamscape wasn't what it seemed, but I did not expect it to go that far. There is a slightly generic formula going to a new area. Meet the boss, work your way through the boss's area, and then fight the boss. But honestly, that's just how Metroidvanias work. I'm truly just nitpicking, so it doesn't sound like I'm just glazing the game the entire video. The level design in this game is also great. That's honestly a prerequisite for making a Metroidvania though. Like I said earlier, the developers focused more on the combat than the platforming, so there's definitely less occasions where you come across an area that you obviously can't reach until later in the game when you get a new movement ability. Hollow Knight especially excels at this, but that doesn't mean Nine Souls never does it. I just don't have many major examples that stick out in my mind. Which honestly is another reason why I say this game is tailor-made for me, because those occasions give me so much anxiety. I'm always afraid that I'm going to forget about them and not come back and miss something. That's definitely a me problem. I should truly just write things down as I come across them, but I have a bad habit of not playing a game for a couple days and totally forgetting about things. Lastly, I want to talk about the story as a whole. I think the relationship they built between Yi, Shanshan, Kafu, and Shenong was really well done. Slowly building a relationship with Shenong while drinking was very fun. I especially love that when you bring Shanshan, all the trinkets and things that you find in the world, you can see the Four Seasons Pavilion slowly change and react to him, making the place his home. It felt pretty obvious to me that Yi was the one that decided to start harvesting the humans, so much so that even Shanshan figured it out. But I still think his growth of appreciation for the Ape Men, and of Shanshan specifically, was still well earned, and I think they did a great job with it. There are some pretty great characters in this game, like finding out Lear had to kill 3 of his men under him because they had become corrupt. I just really love the lore that you uncover while playing, and all of the characters prop it up. I beat the game and got the normal ending because I didn't find all the poison items, but after seeing that there was an alternate ending, I went back through and did that because how could I not? I wasn't going to do it because the idea of fighting Igong's third phase filled me with genuine fear. But the true ending was so much more emotional and impactful, I just had to do it. The last bit before the ending, where you hear Hang's last message and realize she's been dead for hundreds of years, was honestly tragic. But it was nice that Yi got to see her again after all that time in the very end. It's crazy to me that the developers created this whole world and lore and this incredible game just to kill the main character at the end, almost guaranteeing that there won't ever be a sequel, which is such a shame. But I appreciate them just going for it and completing their vision that they had, regardless of if it was a good business decision or not. It does feel like an appropriate end to the story. I also find it funny that the game implies that Solarians continue to live on by becoming house cats. The game shows you 2 cats trapped in tubes, and if you return after escaping Igong's dreamscape, you find that they've broken free, and I think the implication is that they escaped back to Earth with New Kunlun, and that's how we got cats. So in the end, Yi did end up saving his race in a way. If you've made it this far into the video and haven't played the game, I'm once again urging you to play it, even with all the spoilers. This was such a fantastic experience, and the fact that it was made by such a small studio with a completely irrelevant niche just adds to the profound accomplishment of these developers. They should be incredibly proud for what they created, and I look forward to seeing their future endeavors, whether they return to the action genre or not. Thanks for watching. My first video absolutely exceeded my expectations with how well it performed. So if you watched that video or subscribed because of it, I greatly appreciate it. I always wanted to make YouTube videos because I spent so much time on this website watching videos about my hobbies and documentary level videos that get posted like almost daily. It felt like it was only right to give back to some people after having consumed so much. Like I said earlier, with the rise of AI, it's even more important to have human-made things. So if you have ever had any inclination to create something, you should. I started learning art for game development, and it's been something that's been so fulfilling, despite the fact that AI is ruining the arts, and despite the fact that I still have a long way to go before I'm actually good. So go make some art, go make a YouTube video, go make a game, because the world needs more people that create. Thanks again for watching. Hate to say goodbye.